Here in Florida, we have something special we never enjoyed at Disneyland, the blessing of signs. There's enough land here to hold all the ideas and plans we can possibly imagine.
May Walt Disney World bring joy and inspiration and new knowledge to all who come to this happy place.
The Walt Disney World Resort. Today, there's not just one, but 4 unique Disney theme parks, as well as Disney water parks, championship golf courses, miniature golf courses, in fact, an entire wide world of sports. It's a vacation kingdom filled with one-of-a-kind Disney-themed resorts. And of course, the dining, shopping, and distinctive entertainments of downtown Disney. Since October 1st, 1971, Walt Disney World has brought joy and entertainment to millions. And it all started so many years ago as one man's dream. This man, Walt Disney. On July 17, 1955, Walt swung open the gates to Disneyland in Anaheim, California. But within just a few short years, he was looking to push the boundaries of his imagination once again, to create not just another Magic Kingdom, but a whole new Disney World.
Today, I want to share with you some of our ideas for Disney World.
To do this, he turned to the men and women who had helped him design and build Disneyland, his Imagineers. In December of 1952, Walter Elias Disney, using his initials as a name, created WED Enterprises.
This is what we call our Imagineering department. It's where we dream up our new projects.
These Imagineers turned their attention towards the East Coast and Florida to help Walt create a new kind of vacation kingdom, a Disney World with its very own Magic Kingdom.
This is where the early planning is taking place for our so-called Disney World project.
Hi, I'm Diego Paris, and this is the original headquarters of WED Enterprises in Glendale, California. It's now called Walt Disney Imagineering, and this is where the dreams and plans for the Walt Disney World Resort were first created. And who better to tell us how it all began than one of the original members of the Walt Disney Imagineering creative and planning team, Marty Sklar, Executive Vice President for Parks and Resorts and Ambassador for Imagineering.
WED was Walt's personal company. You might say it was kind of his laughing place. He loved coming over and going to the model shop when it was at the studio. Every day, all of us walked through the model shop to get to wherever we were. So we knew exactly what was going on. It was really a wonderful way to work, and Walt really liked it because from a creative standpoint, it was Walt and the Imagineers.
It became obvious in the years going into the 1960s that not only were we designing Disneyland, we were being sent off to look at world's expositions, world's fairs. So that meant that when Walt launched us into all the 4 projects that we worked on at the World's Fair for New York, 64, 65, these were projects that we got rolling very seriously on by the summer of 1961.
Well, we actually moved out of the studio in 61 onto a little building on Flower Street in Glendale. And that's where all the World's Fair shows were designed and where Walt Disney World was designed after we acquired a big building right next door.
So Walt Disney decides he wants to build a Disneyland-style park, actually something much bigger, on the East Coast. And so very quietly, Buzz Price and the team that had helped him with Disneyland took a look at places on the East Coast, and of course the one that won out was Central Florida.
There were about 65 different landowners were involved, put together the 27,400 acres initially back in 1965. And knowing it's like twice the size of island of Manhattan or the size of the city of San Francisco, it's an enormous piece of property. And when I studied Walt Disney's his own personal plan for that land, I was so impressed because for someone like Walt, never went to an architectural school or planning school, that was able to have a long-term vision.
In late 1965, we kept hearing about Project X. And there were a lot of people who had been working on this for years, and they really had been keeping their mouths shut, but we knew something was up. So in October of 1965, there was an unofficial announcement that somebody in Florida figured out who was buying all this property and what was going to go there.
If you go back to The 1965 press conference he did with Governor Burns when Walt and Roy Disney announced the Walt Disney World project. Walt was asked a question, was he going to do another Disneyland? And he said there were so many attractions at Disneyland that the public would expect to have here, and they would be disappointed if we did a project and didn't have some of those attractions. So while he was thinking about that, Walt never wanted to repeat himself.
And so really it enabled the Imagineers to make the park bigger, to accommodate more people, and introduce some of the classic shows from Disneyland, but also invent some new shows for that next generation of audience.
We all looked at each other over at WED Enterprises of, oh, now we know why we've been working on all this stuff. Now we know why we've got all these people here. Walt has us launched on this great big monstrous project way over on the other side of the United States. And of course now we understood why Walt bought a corporate aircraft so that we could go back and forth a couple trips a week. So we got launched into what turned out to be a very, very long project to develop the entire property.
Initially, because of the secrecy behind the Florida project, it was known as Project X. And then it was known as the Florida Project, and then it was known as Disney World. But after Walt died, Roy Disney came out of retirement to make sure that his brother's final dream would be brought to life.
You know, originally people started calling Walt Disney World Disney World, and Roy O. Disney was very unhappy about that because he really wanted to honor his brother. He wanted everybody to know this is Walt Disney World.
So that people would know it was the dream of a real person, Walt Disney.
I remember sitting on the curb as Roy Disney read that dedication.
May Walt Disney World bring joy and inspiration and new knowledge to all who come to this happy place.
Roy really gave it all. He was about to retire at the time Walt passed away, and he was already in his early 70s, and he stayed on, 5 more years and passed away about 2 months after we opened Walt Disney World.
Before we opened, there were so many incredible events that happened. We went out to the monorail barn and we climbed up a ladder. We weren't sure, but we kind of thought we were going to get the first official monorail ride. And they pulled that monorail out and it was dark. And I remember coming out fairly slowly on the spur beam and then joining the mainline track. And then we moved in front of the Magic Kingdom and it stopped. And of course we all thought, a glitch. But no, they had paused us in front of Main Street looking down, and within about 5 minutes, for the first time ever, the castle lit up. And I think the goosebumps could have powered that monorail all the way around the rest of the track, because not only were we riding that train for the first time, but here was a look at what Walt Disney World was going to be all about.
I think the difference between Disneyland in Anaheim, California, and the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World is that was the next generation of the Walt Disney originally designed park. And he had learned a lot of lessons in Anaheim, especially about having as much land as possible.
Well, one of the things that bothered Walt Disney very much was all the things that grew up around Disneyland.
All these motels and hotels sprang up because the company didn't have the money to buy enough land, and Walt hated it. There was the way people had to come into his park, and he said, I want to be able to control the aesthetics of how people come and visit my park.
So he vowed that he would never let that happen again, and that if he ever did build another Disneyland, he would acquire enough land that he could create a buffer zone around all the projects that he was doing.
When the guests visit Magic Kingdom or Disney World for the first time, I think they are happily surprised that in order to get from their parking area to Magic Kingdom, if you take the ferry across, it slows you down, gets to a decompression zone, get you ready for the magical moment as you enter the main gates of Magic Kingdom.
I don't want the public to see the world they live in while they're in the park, Walt told his Imagineers from creating Disneyland. I'd like them to feel like they are in another world. The same holds true here at the Magic Kingdom in Florida. Here you leave today and enter the world of yesterday, tomorrow, and fantasy. Let's go see the world they created for us to enjoy.
We want you to see and share with us the experience of building this dream into a reality. Straight ahead lies the heartline of America, an old-fashioned Main Street. Hometown USA, just after the turn of the century.
Drawn from Walt Disney's own boyhood memories, this is Main Street, USA. A small American town at the crossroads of the emerging 20th century.
Main Street, USA, at the Magic Kingdom is really a reflection of the turn of the century America and a small town ready for the 4th of July, as it probably never really was, but everybody remembers that it might have been like that. And now it's really become the symbol for the entry to many of the Disney parks around the world.
The vehicles on Main Street are very important because they're part of the life of the street.
One of the great designers in Disneyland's history is Bob Gurr.
Whether it was a fire engine or the horse-drawn streetcar, Bob Gurr designed the theme, if you will, to fit the street. And Bob was very sensitive about that. And I think they catch the spirit of the period that we're in. You couldn't do the same Main Street as at Disneyland. We had to have the buildings taller, and there was an operational reason too. We need to have office spaces, which Disneyland doesn't have. Disneylands are all facades except for the ground floor, which are the shops. But beyond that, we were in a different part of the world. It wasn't any longer Walt's Midwest. So the designers went for a Victorian look, but making it the Eastern Seaboard Victorian.
From Disneyland to Magic Kingdom in Florida, that the Imagineers were able to transform in a larger scale, but yet still very intimate. And you don't feel like, the scale would dwarf you. I thought it was brilliant how they use the colors, the shape of the roofs and the buildings, and still were able to transform a bigger Magic Kingdom in such intimate way.
I think it worked very well. You still have the same attitude, the same feeling.
The bronze statue here in Town Square Park of Roy Disney and Minnie Mouse is called Friends. Sculpted by Imagineer Blaine Gibson, it's a tribute to the man who brought to life Walt Disney's dream of a Magic Kingdom in Florida.
Well, Roy E. Disney decided that he wanted to honor his father because Roy O. Disney really made Walt Disney World come true, if you will. And I remembered some wonderful photos that were taken the day before we opened Walt Disney World. And Roy O. Disney was so relaxed, sitting on a park bench. And so talking to Blaine, we said, well, why don't we depict that moment again and have him sitting there with Minnie? And that's what Blaine was able to do.
Hey, Mickey, mind if I catch a ride with you? Great. So you're gonna give me the tour?
There's a big mystery at Walt Disney World about the utilidors. And yes, it's true that the entire park was built up on the second floor. Now, why would we go through all that work? Well, Walt Disney, it turns out, on one of his walks through Disneyland, had encountered a lot of employees trying to get from where they worked back to the cafeteria, then back out to where they work. And so you might have a cowboy walking through the future, or someone in Victorian clothing over in Fantasyland. And this bothered him because Disneyland was all about show. And so Walt said, I've got to find a way that we don't have that happening. So I think the utilidors are probably a way of grappling with that.
I remember the first time I was on this property, October 1967, we had cleared 100 acres and we put a big yellow X where we were going to build the castle. John Hench dug a hole about a foot deep, and we came back the next morning, it was filled with water. So we knew we were this close to the water table.
The Imagineers with John Hench and Marty, they were ingenious. They said, okay, if we're going to raise, the elevation of, let's say, Magic Kingdom anyway, why don't we put that to use?
We took a lot of landfill and raised the level of the Magic Kingdom 14 feet.
And of course, we need a lot of dirt. So they said, where should we get the dirt? So on the master plan, they said, why don't we just get it from the front door? So they created Seven Seas Lagoon. So it's about 200 acres of a water surface area. And, raise the elevation of the ground floor on one hand. On the other hand, you create the utilidor,
which is really terrific because it gave us the opportunity to put all the infrastructure right under the park.
The windows on Main Street at the Magic Kingdom have a very special place in Disney history and in Imagineering history.
At Disneyland, Walt had used the windows on Main Street as a way of thanking some of the contributors who created that park. Well, when Walt Disney World was being built, the Main Street windows were looked on as just being fictitious names for the longest time. But Roy Disney really liked that tradition that Walt had started at Disneyland and insisted that we carry on that tradition in the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World. And to this very day, when we build Magic Kingdom parks, we always carry on that tradition of thanking the contributors and the designers and the people who built those dreams on the windows on Main Street.
I think one of the things that was very hard to deal with for both Walt Disney Company and the Disney family was the loss of Walt. So it was undertaken to create a Walt Disney story.
And we found some recordings from a lot of interviews that Walt did. And we put the theater on Main Street.
And through Walt's own words, introduce you to this man.
Where he told the story of his career from growing up on a small town to the Walt Disney World project.
And that made a huge difference in being able to really communicate his concepts.
Now, at the foot of Main Street, about where you're sitting, is the plaza.
This is Central Plaza, also known as the Hub, because each of the original lands radiate off it like the spokes of a wheel.
Central Plaza at the Magic Kingdom is really designed to be a gathering point and a decision-making point of where do I go first.
And that's the beginning of your story as you look into each of the lands in the Magic Kingdom, Tomorrowland and Fantasyland and Adventureland. In each case, it's the start of another story.
The bronze statue here in the center of Walt Disney and Mickey Mouse is called Partners. Sculpted by Walt Disney Imagineer Blaine Gibson, it's a celebration to the founder of the Walt Disney Company and his most famous creation.
Our second realm is called Adventureland. Within Adventureland is a wonder world of nature's own design. For animal creatures, her fabulous plan of life. Here, too, is a world of unusual people and faraway places.
The Imagineers created a thrilling journey to exotic and enchanting realms of exploration, adventure, and discovery. This is Adventureland, inspired in part by some of Walt Disney's true life adventure films. Hey, what's the matter, Goofy? Lose your way? Well, I think the Jungle Cruise is over there. Come on.
One advantage we had in Florida, of course, with the Jungle Cruise is everything grows so abundantly. And Bill Evans, who did all the planning of plants and everything for the Jungle Cruise, took advantage, full advantage of that with the kind of trees and shrubs and plants that he used.
One of the other great Imagineers that worked on Walt Disney World and Disneyland was Mark Davis, who is a fantastic animator. Mark had a new idea for how he was going to do the Jungle Cruise, and he had some great new things. You go into a temple in Florida. These are things that we don't have in California. So it was a grand rethinking of the Jungle Cruise. But Mark, coming out of animation, had taken his incredible creatures and put them against more or less cartoon-styled rocks that were pink and blue and purple and so forth. Well, the in-field directors faithfully recreated the rocks exactly as Mark had done them. And I got a call and they said, can you take a look at toning down the rock work? So I went out into the Jungle Cruise with Tommy Radowski, who was one of the scenic painters down there. He was in waders and I was in a boat, and I was directing. I was saying a little bit more brown on this side, a little bit more of green on this side. All of a sudden I turned around and Tom was gone. And then there's just bubbles on the water. And it turned out the way the Jungle Cruise is designed, everywhere there's an animal, it's about twice as deep so that the animal can retract, like a hippopotamus can go down into the hole. And poor Tommy had fallen down into this hole, and I turned around, he was gone, and he surfaced in about a minute, gasping for air. So we watched where we were going for the rest of that project.
Everything in Disneyland originally was based on something Walt had done in a motion picture or on television.
Now, Walt Disney had a mega hit, a live-action film called Swiss Family Robinson in the early 60s, and it was a natural to really bring that to Disneyland and let everybody go into this amazing treehouse that we all dreamed of.
And so we continued that kind of tradition in Walt Disney World.
It's a place where, wow, I want to go away to some exotic island and live in a tree like that.
Aloha! It is showtime now in Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room.
Well, the Enchanted Tiki Room, of course, was the first attraction to ever use audio animatronics. In Disneyland, it's a very compact room because it was originally going to be a small restaurant. The idea of the birds and the flowers and the totems became so strong that Walt said, let's forget the restaurant, let's do this show.
And the same holds true for when that exact show opened at the Magic Kingdom in Florida in 1971. As the 70s progressed, people were less interested in a long show. And so we thought, well, what if we approached it with kind of a Hollywood-style look and feel to it, with Iago and Zazu being the new owners of the Tiki Room, and they're vying for position and power, and who's really going to be the big owner, and who's going to be the top celebrity, and all that kind of stuff. So the show begins like it always has. The Tiki Room comes to life, and who interrupts it but Iago? And he says, I'm here to tell you I'm the new owner. You birds have to get hip. Can your wings do this? Can your tails do that? And of course, Zazu is paranoid because he's afraid of the Tiki gods. And of course, Iago, because of his personality, he upsets the Tiki gods. Well, we introduced a brand new character called Aoa, the Tiki goddess of disaster. And she's been living underneath the Tiki Room for all these years, and she just comes out of the fountain with her eyes glowing, and she says, who dares disturb the Tiki Room? She's really upset. And Iago's a little worried about this, and she throws her magic around, and we think Iago is blasted out of the room, but he's not really, because he appears at the end of the show with crutches and bandaged up, and he learns his lesson that you don't mess with the Tiki god.
What about you, Jose? You got anything to say?
Hasta la vista.
That's right, hasta la vista.
The real quintessential attraction that in many ways changed the business was Pirates of the Caribbean.
And here are the pirates in here ransacking and carrying away loot and everything. As you get down here and look through that little ring, you get the view that the audience gets.
So that attraction was a wonder to watch it being designed at Wed Enterprises. They made models of the scenes and arranged them in such a manner that you could walk through the scenes and see them at eye level. I never saw so much detailed design directed by Walt and all the designers.
Ironically, Pirates of the Caribbean was not meant to be a part of the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World.
The reason being that management at the time felt that since Florida was close to the real New Orleans, because Pirates of the Caribbean was set at New Orleans Square, and Florida had so much pirate history of its own, they thought, well, no one's going to be interested in seeing our fictional pirates.
But when the park opened, everyone who came to Walt Disney World said, where's Pirates of the Caribbean? They had seen it on television, they wanted it, and it very quickly came to Walt Disney World.
Well, when we made the decision to add Pirates of the Caribbean to the Magic Kingdom in Florida, Mark Davis saw an opportunity to improve on the original.
Now, these sketches here have to do with some of the things that are going to happen when you take this cruise through the pirates' domain.
Mark wanted the pirates to actually succeed in their quest, so he added a treasure room scene at the end where it becomes clear to the guests that the pirates have in fact found the hidden and allegedly cursed treasure that they came looking for.
Who knew that an attraction, Pirates of the Caribbean, would inspire a franchise of blockbuster films, Pirates of the Caribbean?
We were in the process of taking a look at the Pirates of the Caribbean attraction in Florida when the Pirates of the Caribbean movies were released. So we took an opportunity to not only look at taking some of the classic effects and scenes and enhancing them, but bringing Captain Jack Sparrow and Barbossa into the Pirates of the Caribbean attraction.
And so we were challenged with the notion that the story of pirates, which we had begun, had changed, and that kids and new generations were growing up with the movie first and then coming to our park.
So we quickly decided, in order to make Pirates endure and be relevant to this new generation of fans, we should add some of the mythology from the films back into the attraction that inspired it.
The fun roles of being a show producer is I sort of get to work with everyone, from the figure development people to the story writers to the music to the lighting. And so we never wanted to change the classic Pirates of the Caribbean attraction. What we wanted to do was enhance it.
The idea was we fit Captain Jack Sparrow into the ride as if he had always been there without changing the classic ride that everybody knows and loves. The new storyline that we wanted to add was Captain Jack is looking for this treasure that's hidden in the town. And pirates, of course, are always about treasure. There was a scene where originally a young woman was hiding in a barrel and a sort of portly, drunken pirate was leaning against the barrel looking for her. He's got her hanky and he asks people passing by in a boat, have you seen this attractive-looking woman? And of course, she's right behind him. Well, over the years, the woman was replaced by a cat, which is a step down from a beautiful woman, I think. But we wanted to get a figure back in there, so we decided to put Captain Jack in the barrel. So he's hiding in there, and we made the drunken pirate a guy with a map to the treasure. At that moment, Captain Jack's looking over his shoulder, taking in the map, and now he knows where the treasure is. So when you see Captain Jack again, he's sitting on top of the treasure, he's on top of the world and having a drink and singing yo-ho along with the other pirates.
Well, after completing the head of Captain Jack Sparrow, I did have the opportunity to meet the gentleman, so that was quite extraordinary. We went and waited on the set until he had some time, and we brought that over to him, and he was quite lovely, actually, and he rather enjoyed it.
Captain Barbossa, I think you can see, was kind of inspired by the captain on the ship.
And I got to write new dialogue for Captain Barbossa, but also I used Exitensio's dialogue.
Exitensio, like a lot of the first Imagineers, was an animator at the Walt Disney Studios, and one day Walt popped into X's office and said, I'm sending you over to WED, I'm sending you to Imagineering, and his first assignment was Pirates of the Caribbean.
And Exitensio is a very famous, well-known Imagineer. He wrote the words to the Pirates of the Caribbean song, Yo-Ho, Yo-Ho, and he was the writer on the attraction. So we thought his words were sacred, and we in no way wanted to do anything to tarnish that great creation of his. He's a very nice man, very friendly, but I have a feeling if we messed up, you know, he would come after us. So I wanted some specific mention of Captain Jack, but I also mixed in, oh, you bloomin' cockroaches, which is a beloved line from the captain, and the other comments that he makes to the guys in the fort.
From a story standpoint, from a design standpoint, everything we do is kind of measured against Pirates of the Caribbean.
Frontierland. It is here that we experience the story of our country's past. The color, romance, and drama of frontier America as it developed from wilderness trails to roads, riverboats, railroads, and civilization. A tribute to the faith, courage, and ingenuity of our hardy pioneers who blazed the trails and made this progress possible.
Welcome to Frontierland. Here in the Old West, the spirit of the pioneer still lives on. Hey, Donald, the next raft to Tom Sawyer's Island is actually down here a ways. Now, here's a few Imagineering yarns about the creation of Frontierland.
There definitely was an effort to try and differentiate Disneyland and the Magic Kingdom in Florida. And one of the biggest was going to be in Frontierland.
At the Magic Kingdom, Frontierland is much more of a riverside town. The designers wanted to tell a different story that takes a West Coast to East Coast journey, ending up at Liberty Square, which is also a later time period, but it's a really seamless segue from the frontier times to the colonial period.
We were considering doing a winter and summer resort in California called Mineral King. Mark Davis started playing with the idea of doing a show with audio animatronic bears.
Mark tells the story of developing all these bears and sharing it with Walt.
Mark had done, maybe 10 sketches of character bears playing instruments and singing.
And Walt looked at those and thought they were very, very funny.
On the last day that Walt visited Imagineering, he may have known he wasn't going to be back. So he went in there and Mark took him through the same show, kind of a little puzzled why he was asking to see it again. And when it was done, he said, "Thank you, Mark, I really appreciate that," which Mark said later, that was odd because Walt never said that to me.
The Mineral King project didn't move forward, but no good ideas disappear in Imagineering. And so when Walt Disney World was being conceived, the Bears moved to Florida.
When we started doing Walt Disney World, Mark went to Dick Irvine and said, "Why don't we develop this as a story?"
And there was another fellow, Albertino, who was the model for Big Al. He was Big Al. And I met him many years later, and I was astounded that he looks just like Big Al. Maybe not as much fur, but certainly his attitude and his face is just wonderful. And apparently he's the first man who sang Blood on the Saddle and sold the idea.
The characters are just fabulous, all of them. And I think people who've grown up in animation, as Mark did, could develop the personalities that were in those characters. And it's still one of the most popular shows at the Magic Kingdom. And it came from that one magic moment when Walt came in and said, "Gee, this looks like a lot of fun, let's do it."
The year we opened, the preview center that was up slightly before Walt Disney World was a picture of a major element in Frontierland called the Western River Expedition, and it was housed in a building called Thunder Mesa.
It was going to be the most gargantuan show building ever created for a Disney park, and it was going to be essentially a mountain range in the Southwest United States.
With characters a la the pirates, only they were Western, cowboys, Indians, etc. Well, it got to be a very difficult project to do, both from a construction standpoint and from a timing standpoint. We just ran out of time to get everything done.
When management decided to add Pirates of the Caribbean to the Magic Kingdom, Western River Expedition fell by the wayside.
But the notion of the Thunder Mesa and of a unique Western attraction didn't go away. And Tony Baxter began working with the idea of taking the roller coaster, the train portion of Thunder Mesa, and turning it into what would become Big Thunder Mountain Railroad.
Big Thunder was a milestone for me. It was the first attraction I got to see through from the beginning to the end. And it was designed first for Walt Disney World, but it got built in California. People think they're the same, but Disney World is spectacular, and Disneyland is charming. So what you'll find in California is something much like Bryce Canyon. And then to complement in Florida the monumentality of it, what would be better than patterning Big Thunder off of Monument Valley? So when you look out across the river, there's a grandeur to it that really allows it to drink up the massive space that we have. We had a lot of fun in Walt Disney World because with the added space, we were able to create shows for other attractions around it. So the boats all proceed around the east side of the mountain, and on the west side of the mountain, you've got the steam trains going by. And for the steam trains, we created a flash flood town. In order to make it as grand as it is when we were building it, we were able to take advantage of some characters at Disneyland that were abandoned now. So much of the cacti and coyotes and wildcats there are all from a show that Walt Disney had created at Disneyland called Nature's Wonderland that was now defunct because we had built Big Thunder. So we were able to move all these to Florida because Disneyland didn't have the space for them.
Splash Mountain came about because of the success of the Disneyland version of Splash Mountain that opened in 1989. And with the climate in Florida, there's really nothing better than a water-based, log flume ride.
When it came time to add Splash Mountain to Walt Disney World, the natural home for it was in Frontierland. But here in Frontierland, Splash Mountain would have to fit in not only with an old western town, but with Big Thunder Mountain Railroad on the other side.
The site next to Big Thunder worked out to be the best site for us. You've got this beautiful view of the mountain from across the water. When you enter Frontierland, you're looking across the rivers of America, and there's Splash Mountain, Chickapin Hill, with all of the logs going down the face of it, and you see the big splash. So the site actually worked out really well for us.
So here at the Magic Kingdom, Splash Mountain actually has a much more rugged, realistic experience. Once you get into the attraction itself, you are in the cartoon world of Brer Fox, Brer Rabbit, and Brer Bear.
And from the very beginning, from the queue all the way through the pre-show, we set up who these characters are and what their relationships are to each other.
Brer Fox is kind of the nasty guy, Brer Bear is kind of the dumb guy, and Brer Rabbit is who they're after. We really approach it in a linear fashion, which is pretty challenging on a dark ride to do that. So we did pay very, very careful attention to it. I think we're also at a big advantage in telling a linear story in that it's a very long ride. It's close to 12 minutes, which for a Disney attraction or for any dark ride attraction is very long. So we had a long time to tell the story, and I think that really works to our advantage.
I like to think of them as very pleasant thrill rides. They're fun stories and family attractions.
Ever since I was a small boy in Illinois, I've had a great personal admiration for Abraham Lincoln. So when we decided to recreate some of the great moments in Mr. Lincoln's life, we directed all our energies to that task. We wanted to bring to the people of today the inspiring words of the man who held this nation together during its moment of greatest crisis.
Welcome to the spirit of 1776 here in Liberty Square. Minnie, shall we take a trip back to the beginning of our nation's birth?
You know, there's a saying around Imagineering that no good idea goes away. And it's true that often an idea has to wait for the right time and the right place.
The Hall of Presidents was originally conceived to be a show for Disneyland in 1959.
Walt had always wanted to do a story about the American presidents. He envisioned a show where all of the presidents of the United States would be together as audio animatronics figures in a show called One Nation Under God. And this show was going to be part of a Liberty Square area of Disneyland. And he was designing that attraction when the New York World's Fair came along.
Now, we did not have audiomatronics at that time. And when finally he did have the opportunity to do the presidents, the thought of doing, I think, 36 of them was daunting.
And Lincoln was plucked out of that for the New York World's Fair.
Great moments with Mr. Lincoln only exist because he had to scale back his grand thinking.
But when Walt Disney World came around, we now had the chance to build Liberty Square.
So Dick Irvine and others decided that we should put in the great show that Walt had intended for Liberty Street.
The actual first show, the Hall of Presidents, and the scripting and the music and everything that was in that show back in '59 actually made it to Walt Disney World in 1971. So Walt Disney was very familiar with that show. It was what he wanted to do, and to actually see that like almost 20 years later come to life at Walt Disney World and sit in that theater before it opened when there were maybe only 4 or 5 of us listening and watching it, it was awesome. It was probably on a scale bigger than anything we'd ever done before. I mean, to see the curtains open up there with all the presidents and done in a level of audiomatronic detail for that era that was just astonishing. And it was air conditioned too.
Well, we needed a central tree for Liberty Square, a Liberty tree.
And that meant a massive tree, and the tree would have to grow on the roof of the utilidors that are directly below it.
Well, one of the things that Bill Evans pioneered way back from the beginning of Disneyland was moving large specimen trees so you didn't kill them. Bill Evans would bore a hole in the tree and put a steel pin in it and lift the tree that way. And Bill found the biggest oak on the property. And everybody said, well, you're going to kill the tree doing that. And Bill said, no, it'll grow over, you know.
And it was, for a while, touch and go.
But Bill treated it with tender, loving care, as no other tree was ever treated. And over time, that tree came back.
That oak, when you visit Liberty Square with all the hanging lanterns in it, is the Freedom Oak that was so much a part of Walt's story of the birth of American freedom.
It is, in many ways, the lifeblood of Liberty Square. It's enormous and it's beautiful, and it is the Liberty tree.
People don't realize, I think, that the Haunted Mansion in Walt Disney World was built at the same time as the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland in 1969. And as a result, when I got down there on the property in April, there was already one ride that was complete and ready to go.
There was the library that was not at Disneyland, and the conservatory and a couple other scenes that didn't exist at Disneyland. So I was impressed that they took something that was great and then made it even better.
No two are ever alike in our parks, and so in Walt Disney World, because of its placement in Liberty Square, the exterior of the mansion is very different.
You know, one of the things we had was a terrible time coming up with the architecture for the Haunted Mansion. In California, it's in an old antebellum southern plantation, but because of the change to Liberty Square, something else was needed. And time again, the architects came up with something that just didn't look haunted. Finally, they realized that Claude Coates, from the old school Disney animation, was a licensed architect. So all the funky corbels and weird demonic shapes and stuff that give it a personality are all pure Claude Coates.
Claude Coates tweaked the design and played with the scale so that the wings of the mansion actually give it the appearance of a creature that's rearing up to strike at you.
Here we've got more of a Dutch Gothic facade, and it's sort of set back and is sort of foreboding. It's the same great classic story.
Mark Davis is the master in charge of our House of Illusions, or what do we call it? A Haunted Mansion.
When Walt was around, he was able to meld Mark Davis and Claude Coates and Rolly Crump together and create something that was very harmonious. But as he departed, these people created in their own worlds. The Haunted Mansion is interesting because it depicts all three of those worlds. So I always like to think that the portions that are really creepy and scary belong to Claude Coates. The things that are strange and eerie and weird are definitely Rolly Crump. And the things, particularly in the end of the ride, that are humorous and fun belong to Mark Davis. And so you can really see the three personalities coming out in this ride.
It was actually Ex Atencio, the show writer on the project, who helped unify that vision, both with his classic Ghost Host spiel and another song, Grim Grinning Ghosts.
So he wrote those fantastic lines in the stretch room, you know, where he came up with "Your cadaverous pallor betrays an aura of foreboding." I don't think we'll ever come up with that again, but it's classic.
We recently had an opportunity to come in and give that classic attraction a new, refresh feel, and brought to life a few more of those 999 happy haunts. In our portrait gallery, our artwork changes as lightning is striking. There's a scene that's called the Grand Staircase. Here, it used to be a very long staircase in a very dark space. Now we have expanded the mansion so you can see our grand staircase just going in all different directions, all different dimensions.
We call it the Endless Staircase. It's a way for us to introduce our guests to some of the other 999 happy haunts.
Because it's such a classic attraction, we didn't change any of the dialogue. It's the original music. It's the original Madame Leota. Although we're using new technology to allow her to hover over the table, it is the original Lee Toombs who performed that role so many years ago.
And at Walt Disney World, when you exit the Haunted Mansion, there's a mausoleum that talked about a husband who had many wives, and the last one did him in. And we were very intrigued by that and said, well, what if we were to twist that and have like a Black Widow bride who had many husbands and did them in? And we were inspired by one of the portraits in the stretching room that shows an elderly woman sitting on the tombstone of George, and George has a hatchet in his head. And so we decided to build that into the story of who was that person. And so that became our attic bride.
Here in the attic are 5 of her past marriages, and her husbands have sort of lost their heads over her. This was really a fun scene to bring to Walt Disney World. And then as we exit past our hitchhiking ghosts, we also have Little Leota reminding you, don't forget your death certificate.
You seen enough? You want to see some more? We got a lot of stuff.
Oh, let's see some more.
I think we better get out of here. I think we're being watched anyway.
Good idea.
Tomorrow offers new frontiers in science, adventure, and ideals. The atomic age, the challenge of outer space, and the hope for a peaceful and unified world.
Let's take an out-of-this-world trip with the Imagineers as they tell us how they keep Tomorrowland from becoming Yesterdayland. Tomorrowland, a world of imagination and beyond. The Imagineers have filled it with sci-fi dreams, fantasies, and soaring adventures.
Tomorrowland has always been an issue of trying to hit a moving target. because the future is always changing.
Tomorrowland and Walt Disney World on opening day truly was Tomorrowland, because there was no Space Mountain, there was no People Mover, there was no Carousel of Progress.
There was a Grand Prix Raceway, a Circle Vision Theater that opened with a new movie, Magic Carpet Around the World, and then we had Mission to Mars.
Over time, I think Tomorrowland kind of became Yesterdayland. And in the Magic Kingdom, we took a whole different approach. We've tried to go to an architecture that will last longer and has a more fantastic and a fun look to it. So it's a retro future, if you will.
It's when robots walked your dogs, and there were these wonderful ways to transport yourself around town, and there were these hoverburbs where people live. So it was really kind of the fantasy of tomorrow. It's the one that everybody wanted, but it never really happened. But maybe it will someday.
John Hench developed the concept for Space Mountain in 1965 for Disneyland.
Walt Disney got with John Hench, one of his trusted confidants and a legendary Imagineer, and said, I'd like to do a roller coaster in outer space, in the dark.
And we couldn't do it because computer systems were not sophisticated enough in those days to keep the vehicles separated inside Space Mountain. 1971 now, computers had come along to a point where you could do that.
So Marty Sklar and his team dusted off the Space Mountain concept and kind of reimagined it for Walt Disney World and came up with a way to fulfill Walt's dream of a roller coaster in the dark.
So we took the idea of Space Mountain and we enlarged it. If you look at Space Mountain in the Magic Kingdom, it's 1/3 bigger than Space Mountain in Disneyland.
Space Mountain, of course, became the spaceport where you could hop on a rocket and transport yourself into space.
It's been thrilling audiences ever since.
The Carousel Theater will present a warm and entertaining portrayal of how life has changed through electrical energy.
After Walt opened Disneyland in 1955, of course, he was always thinking, what's next? What are we going to do next? Well, a lot of people don't know this, but he wanted to introduce a whole new street off Main Street that he wanted to call Edison Square.
And Edison Square was going to tell the story of Thomas Edison and electricity and how it changed our lives.
The show starred a father character named Wilbur K. Watt. And Wilbur was going to take you through the history of electrical appliances and how electricity helped to make life better. Edison Square never happened because Walt and his Imagineers got way too busy planning for the 1964 World's Fair. But they didn't lose the show.
That actually became part of the Carousel of Progress at the World's Fair and then moved on to Disneyland and ultimately to Tomorrowland in the Magic Kingdom.
This is the Carousel Theater host. Whatever the man in the harness does, this figure will respond simultaneously in the same manner. Be careful your life. I don't think we better. No smoking on the stage.
We turned this theatrical experience into a ride. People went crazy. They'd never seen anything like it. And then to add to that magic, of course, Walt called in Richard and Robert Sherman to write the theme song, something upbeat. And they decided that because it was about Walt talking about the future and about making life better, that really, unbeknownst to Walt, they would create Walt's theme song. There's a great big beautiful tomorrow.
The Carousel of Progress holds a world record of one of the longest running theatrical shows in history.
It's played to more audience members over the years than any of them. It's spectacular to think about.
Mission to Mars was one of the original opening day attractions at the Magic Kingdom. Then we did the Alien Encounter attraction.
A group of Imagineers had worked really, really long and hard and tirelessly to take the idea of binaural sound and craft an attraction from that.
Access Tech, they were demonstrating their technology on how to teleport things from space to Earth. And of course, the technology didn't quite work. And so this monster was teleported in, broke out of the case, and just wreaked havoc and it was actually pretty scary.
And if getting close to you in the dark with sound isn't violating your space enough, then physically touching you is. So when the creature was flying around the room, what adds a layer of reality, not only do you hear its wings flapping as it goes over you, but you can feel the wind that comes from that flap of the wings. You hear this horrible alien come right up behind and breathe on you. Your imagination puts all that together when you're in the dark.
With the Magic Kingdom being more of a family audience and wanting less scary and maybe a little bit more humorous, it came time to rethink what that space could be. Well, fortunately for us, what film came out and became very popular was Lilo and Stitch.
It seemed like it would be a lot of fun to work with the four-armed character, and clearly his personality at the beginning of Lilo and Stitch was this total wild little crazy alien. We liked that. We said that could be a lot of fun to have that little wild crazy little alien running around in the room instead of this big huge nasty alien, and still have a lot of fun with this binaural system and so forth.
So an attraction in Tomorrowland that started as Mission to Mars, then became Alien Encounter, and then finally became Stitch's Great Escape. We really felt that when Stitch came out, he was a character that belonged in the Magic Kingdom, and that's why we switched over to that attraction.
One of Tomorrowland's opening day attractions was Magic Carpet Round the World in Circle Vision 360. Subsequently, that was replaced by America the Beautiful, another Circle Vision presentation. Then later on, we brought a version of a show from Disneyland Paris to Florida called Timekeeper, which was also a Circle Vision 360 movie, but had audio animatronic figures in it. Just recently, that attraction has become the Monsters Incorporated Laugh Floor,
which is a show where you can talk to the monsters, they can talk to you in a comedy club setting.
It's what we call one of our living character shows, and it really is a chance to take the fantastically animated characters from the Monsters Incorporated movie and introduce them in a way that people have never seen before and appear to be completely alive.
The monster world is brought to life through real-time digital animation. So as far as the guests are concerned, they are interacting with these stand-up comedians in Monstropolis.
Now that the monsters have discovered that human laughter is more powerful than human screams, Mike Wazowski had this idea of, hey, why don't we build a comedy club in Tomorrowland? We'll bring in all these guests who are at the Magic Kingdom, they'll laugh, we'll use their laughter to power Monstropolis.
The shows work for kids because of the magic that happens between the kid and the character, the fact that I can talk to him or that he's talking to the kid next to me. But it works great for adults, too, because there's that, how did they do that factor.
Whenever you pick on a guest out in the audience, you never know what they're going to do or how they're going to react or what they're going to say to the monster, so it makes every show fresh.
And it's just fun to see these characters come to life in a new way.
I guess you all know this little fella here. It's an old partnership. Mickey and I started out the first time many, many years ago. We've had a lot of our dreams come true.
Mickey! Minnie! This is Mickey's Toontown Fair. Now, let's see how the Imagineers spun this cartoon world from the animator storyboard and into the Magic Kingdom.
A lot of people don't realize that when Disneyland opened, Mickey and the characters were not part of it. You've seen a few versions of our Disney characters that were literally rented from the ice show that year to be in the opening day parade. So the idea came about to create a place where Mickey would actually feel at home.
The genesis of Toontown really began in Florida at Walt Disney World because they did this Mickey's birthday land.
And it was a kind of a temporary land, but it was so popular with our guests, we just couldn't close it when it was over.
It proved to be really popular, mostly because the guests finally had a permanent place where they knew they could go and see Mickey Mouse.
So then it became Mickey's Starland when Mickey's birthday was over. And then later on, we developed a way to have it feel more a part of the Magic Kingdom by turning the tents into parts of the Toontown Fairs.
You know, the tents were a temporary thing that ended up staying. And so the tent, as a visual object, lent itself to the fair idea.
The fair has arrived in Toontown, and so it's a combination of where the characters live, Mickey and his friends, and a county fair that's happening all the time.
Fantasyland is dedicated to the young and the young in heart. to those who believe that when you wish upon a star, your dreams do come true. Once here, we can fly with Peter Pan to Neverland, wander with Alice through Wonderland, ride Cinderella's pumpkin coach. In fact, anything your heart desires. Because in this land, hopes and dreams are all that matter.
Walt Disney called Fantasyland a timeless land of enchantment. It's a festive storybook celebration of classic Disney animated stories and characters.
Herb Ryman had the assignment to create the concept for the castle. Unfortunately, he was kind of dawdling. You have to understand that Herb Ryman was the quintessential Disney artist, the best. He was also a mentor for every artist at Imagineering, and mentoring to him meant wandering around the building and poking his head and seeing what people were doing and helping them with their drawings. Since he was slow in getting the castle going, Dick Irvine, the chief of design, said to me, "You get Herbie to finish that drawing. You tell him I want his door closed."
Dick Irvine was the kind of guy that wouldn't let anybody's pencil stop moving even for a minute. That's the way we got stuff done.
And I looked at Dick and I said, "Why don't you tell him yourself?" And Dick said, "Well, he won't listen to me." So my job was to get Herbie to finish the drawing. So I go down to his office and he said, "Well, Dick wants you to close your door. You've got to get this thing finished." Well, for a number of days after that, Herbie's door was always closed. The problem was he was never in his office. He was wandering around the building. So finally, I said, "You're holding up the whole project. The architects can't start on the castle until you have the concept sketch." So he said, "Okay, come back Friday." Friday I come back in and he unveils the very first drawing of the Walt Disney World Castle. And it's me as a gargoyle on the castle, holding my script to my breast and spewing forth nouns and verbs. I said, "Herbie, we can't show this to anybody." And he said, all right. He said, "Come back Tuesday." So Tuesday I came back, sketch, unbelievable. You know, it was all in his head. He just had to get it out.
I think what was really exciting about the opening of Walt Disney World were the new attractions that weren't a part of Disneyland in California. And I think at the high end of that was the Mickey Mouse Revue.
The Mickey Mouse Musical Revue in Fantasyland was really trying to address the fact that over the years, we have had so many incredible songs in our animated movies.
This was a show in a massive theater in which you met an orchestra made out of Mickey and the gang, and then we opened the curtains to reveal Cinderella and Snow White.
Guests loved the Mickey Mouse Revue. It starred Mickey and his pals as audio animatronic performers.
And it was an amazing show, directed by Bill Justice, one of the great animators who came up with Chip and Dale years before.
It was an e-ticket on opening day. For those of you who don't know, when we talk about an e-ticket, for many, many years, there were ticket books for our parks, and attractions were labeled from A through E, with A being the simplest, if you will, and E being the biggest blockbuster attractions in the park. When the Mickey Mouse Musical Revue opened at Walt Disney World, it was one of the initial e-ticket attractions. Well, several years after the park opened, that attraction moved to Tokyo Disneyland.
After that, the theater was changed into The Legend of the Lion King, and then the theater hosted a 3D presentation. And so when it came time to change that attraction again, we thought, well, what can we do? You know, it really feels like it's missing Mickey Mouse.
And years later, in comes Mickey's PhilharMagic.
We wanted the guests, as part of the 3D experience, to be able to feel that they could reach out and touch the Little Mermaid or touch Donald.
And so the more we talked about it, the more we thought, well, what if this was a magical place? This is the Fantasyland Concert Hall. All of the characters come here for the evening to enjoy all of these wonderful performances and acts.
You put on the 3D glasses and you are transported to the worlds of so many of the characters you know and love in a way that you could only get by coming to the Magic Kingdom.
It was just so much fun putting together the show. In fact, it was the first Disney animation that was ever done completely with computer-generated imagery. All the classic characters appeared for the first time in the world of computers, which was really exciting.
I think when you sit in that audience and listen to the kids, listen to everybody in the audience, they really feel like these characters have come to life and they are reachable for them.
In 1959, Disneyland had one of its largest expansions ever in its history, where they opened the monorail and the submarine ride and several other major attractions all at once. Now, the submarine ride was originally intended to be derived from the motion picture 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. The builders of the Nautilus, which was the first atomic-powered submarine, came in, thrilled to sponsor it, but they have a caveat. We want them to look like our Nautilus that went under the North Pole. And so Walt wanted to get this attraction in Disneyland.
Walt said, oh, we're going to have a submarine ride. It's just as simple as that. So naturally, in the spring of 1958, I was given the job of start looking at the design of a submarine.
So the boats came up looking like America's submarine fleet. But he never forgot that, and when the planning was done for Disney World, there is an absolutely magnificent painting that was done showing the Nautilus cruising across a gorgeous lagoon. And I was lucky enough to partner with Claude Coates, going with the show down to Florida and helping to install it. So it was a great working experience.
Well, I think It's a Small World was probably the most magical experience for us as creative people because it happened so quickly.
It's a Small World, which is one of the most popular attractions in Fantasyland, actually got its start at the 1964-65 New York World's Fair.
UNICEF came to Walt about 11 months before the New York World's Fair opened and asked if he would do a show about the children of the world. Walt agreed to do it, and you know, we all panicked because we were already doing the Carousel of Progress and a major attraction with cavemen and dinosaurs. We were also doing great moments with Mr. Lincoln, with a real human figure being done for the first time in audio animatronics, and we were all overwhelmed, to be honest with you.
And then, of course, in the middle of all that, we have the project for the Small World. So I took time out to design the original boat and the type of trough and the type of guidance that we would use on the boats.
But It's a Small World became a fun experience for us. The main thing was the people that Walt brought in. He remembered a sketch that Mary Blair had done for Saludos Amigos, and they became the inspiration for the show. And then Mark Davis broke it down into scenes, and then Rolly Crump had the responsibility of making all the toys with Joyce E. Carlson and Leota Toombs and Harriet Burns. All this was done in an 11-month period, including setting it up in a stage at the Disney studio, and we put the boat on a wooden form with wheels on it that elevated the boat to eye level for the show. And we had to push this along the track, and every one of the scenes is It's a Small World was shipped to New York once Walt had approved it. And of course, Walt brought Bob and Dick Sherman over one day because we were having trouble figuring out how to do the music for the show, and almost overnight created that beautiful song that drives everybody crazy.
And after the fair, Walt brought it to Disneyland, but it was so successful that it really has become one of those classic attractions that's traveled the world.
My favorite attraction in any of the parks is It's a Small World. Just think about it. There's just one moon and one golden sun, and a smile means friendship to everyone. That message is so strong. That song that Bob and Dick Sherman wrote is a touchstone for so much of what the parks stand for. In my belief, I don't think you could pick a greater attraction for the park.
Hey gang, thanks for joining me for our look at the Imagineering behind the magic. And what better way to end a special day at the Magic Kingdom than with parades and fireworks?
So wonderful to be able to say, hey, you know, I've got to grow. I've got to do better next time. I've got to really run with this man. And that was a challenge and an opportunity for all of us.
Walt Disney World is a tribute to the philosophy and the life of Walt Elias Disney.
Quality will out. Keep the place as clean as you can keep it. Keep it friendly. You know, make it a real fun place to be. I think they're convinced, and I think that'll hang on after, as you say, after Disney.